You give the sign, right?
No, you just start.
Okay. Thank you all for being here today. Welcome, I'm Bryan, and together with my teammates Alexis and Ashley, we welcome you to ImagineSG100 conference. And so we are a team of social science students who are responding to the Prime Minister's call for us to reimagine Singapore, what Singapore can be and should be in SG100. Now before we start, I would like everyone to take a moment to think, what makes Singapore Singapore? What is the defining value of Singapore? What is unique to Singapore? Well, for us, for our group, it is the multiculturalism in Singapore. The fact that people of different races in Singapore can coexist and live harmoniously together. That we have Singlish to be proud of, a mismatch of different languages that perhaps serves as a testament to our melting pot of cultures. And that we have signboards in different languages, something which to our group we see as a hallmark of Singapore. Now this very ideal of racial pluralism, of racial equality, is so important to the core of Singapore that it's even enshrined in our constitution, the supreme law of the land. It is also what we as primary school students pledge every morning, regardless of race, language or religion. But really, is that really the reality on the ground? Well, let's recall the time when you're in primary school, where you have a yearly affair, in school when you commemorate Racial Harmony Day, right? We have been inculcated since young the very importance of coexisting harmoniously together, because we don't want to go back to the days where there are racial strife and racial riots and racial protests. No, we don't want that. But how effective has this whole national education been? Well, sadly, not so. In a recent documentary, primary school students were documented as saying that the only time in a year they talk about racial issues is during Racial Harmony Day. And on a daily basis, primary school students, young children, tease each other with racial jokes. I think this really disturbs our group, and I think any Singaporean should be very disturbed that people at such a young age already starts to have a racialized mindset. What else? Let's see. This post. Does it ring any bell? This is a Facebook post by Minister Shanmugam. It's a photo of the swearing-in ceremony of President Halimah Yacob. Now, as all of you are university students, I trust that you are cognizant of the whole heated, contentious debate regarding the recent reserved presidential election. Now, this is our politicians' take on the issue. Malay President, Chinese Prime Minister, Indian Chief Justice. Representation of Singapore. But is this true equality or is this just merely tokenism? I'll let you guys think about it. Which is the most powerful office in the land? Is it a Prime Ministership or is it a President? Just think about these issues. So to our group, it seems that there is a divide between the ideal of regardless of race and language or religion and the reality on the ground. And what could cause this divide? We think it operates on two levels. One on a societal level and one on the state level. Individually, we all have our inherent racial prejudices, right? One example is this, as featured in a documentary Regardless of Race, an ad on Channel News Asia. So this taxi driver has certain racial preferences, but he says that he's not racist. He prefers certain customers over other customers, so he prefers Indian customers the best, right? So this is operated at individual level. At a state level, there are racial categorization by government. What is that? Well, that is the CMIO model, the Chinese, Malay, Indian, others model. How does it operate? Now, I just want you to recall the wristband that we gave at the start of the conference and your seating arrangement. Essentially, the wristband is a symbol of the CMIO model that since birth, you are forced by the state to fit into a certain category, and that category that you're in dictates certain rights and privileges of how you'll be treated by the state, and as you can see, how you are seated in this room. The CMIO model really permeates every aspect of our lives. It informs every level of government policy. From your political rights, when can you stand for election, your mother tongue language in school, where you can live in the public housing, and even the type of social support you receive, because our social support is demarcated along racial lines. Self-help groups are demarcated along racial lines, like CDAC, Chinese Development Assistance Council, SINDA for Indians, and MEDAKI for Malays. Now, you may ask, so what? So what we have racial categorization? How does this stop us from achieving our ideal of a true multiculturalism, a true racial equality? Well, my teammate Alexis will explain that point.
Thank you, Bryan. Hi, I'm Alexis, and I'll be explaining more on this question. So what we have to realize is that race is a social construct, and Singapore used to not be aware of this theory of race. It was recently reiterated by Dr. Tam, who put forth the idea that when we first had British colonialism, they introduced the theory of race, CMIO, into Singapore when they first came. So what does this mean? We have to realize that when the British first introduced this theory, they ran Singapore as a business, meaning they did not care about you, they did not care about your welfare, your family, or anything like that. When they shoved us into Chinese, Malay, Indian, and others, what they wanted to do was to run each of these boxes individually instead of having to deal with the unique individuals that we all are. So what does this mean for us? What we have to realize is that the current adaptation of the CMIO model by our government is definitely not a transactional one. We trust in the social contract that the government cares about us. But what we must realize is that the toxic nature, the divisive nature, is what retains in current society, whether we realize it or not. And we recall back to the pledge, regardless of race, language, or religion, it promises meritocracy. And what is meritocracy? Meritocracy means that we reward individuals based on talent, hard work, effort, and it has nothing to do with who we are or what society says we are. As recently put forth in the SG100 celebration, meritocracy is the key founding principle of Singapore. But do we really have meritocracy in Singapore? I would just like to share one of the personal experiences as a Singaporean Chinese. And very often we see things like looking for Mandarin speakers or able to speak English and Mandarin. But what are they really looking for? They are looking for Singaporean Chinese. And how is this based on talent and hard work if, say, I'm Malay and I can't apply for this job? How is that fair? And more often than not, when I actually turned up at these jobs, speaking Mandarin was not even a requirement. And if that does not disturb you, I don't know what will. And you might be thinking, yes, politics, employment, but I'm just a university student, and perhaps at SG100, we might not even be here anymore. So why does this matter for our future? Well, if you take a look at this, I'm sure all of you will recognize that this is A Boys to Men, which is a very popular movie in Singapore, well loved by most Singaporeans. So take a look at this. Why is it that we have the Chinese male lead who saves the day, the Chinese scholar who is standing right there at the back, the Chinese antagonist, but why do we only have token minority characters? Why is it that some stories, majority stories, are told with passion, accuracy, whereas minority characters are played simply for the sake of it, or perhaps to invoke fear or even laughter? How is this fair? And how will this affect us? So how can we move beyond CMIO? I'll now get my roommate Ashley to elaborate further.
Thank you, Alexis. So, in lieu of all the problems that CMIO has given to Singapore society, there is but one very simple solution. Move beyond CMIO. Stop viewing Singaporeans as just Chinese, Malay, Indians, and others, and move towards one Singapore community. But, you might ask, what about the 1964 racial riots? Have we really moved beyond the racial riots? Can we view Singaporeans as just Singaporeans? We can, and we already have. She is Hammer. He is Daryl. She is Indian. He is Chinese. Like us, they are young. They are married. Happily married. They have managed to find love outside of their race. Love is what drew them together. Race was not a consideration. It's not just Ham and Darrow either. Statistics show that there has been an increasing proportion of inter-ethnic marriages in Singapore. This view on the common ground is also backed by academics, who also do believe that Singapore is ready to move beyond CMIO. So, what can you do to push Singapore away from CMIO? You can go to Speaker's Corner, have rallies there. Let Singaporeans be aware of the fact that there is a gap between what we believe Singapore should be and how it really is. Write to your local newspaper, write to the Straits Times, write to Today Online. Write and let people not only know that the gap exists, but explain how the gap exists. When you write, you are informing all the readers who read your letters of the fact that this gap exists and why this gap is there. Finally, speak to your Member of Parliament. Press your Member of Parliament and let him or her know that you will not stand for CMIO being pushed in government policy. Get your MP to press for the de-emphasis of CMIO in government policies. Now you might think that if I talk about racial relations, it might cause unneeded tension. Well, I raise you this. If you don't talk about racial relations now, when will you talk about it? 10 years? 20 years? If we don't talk about it now, when will we ever talk about it? We have to talk now. I would like to conclude with a reminder of what is in the National Pledge. Regardless of race, language, or religion, racial harmony, racial equality is what we believe in. Yet, Singapore is not there yet. There is but one thing we can do. Move beyond CMIO and move towards one united people. Thank you. Before we start with the question and answer session, I'd just like everyone to have a look through the references we've had for the presentation. This includes the information as well as the various image files.
Yes, so now we're very happy to take any questions if you have any. I think it's very important that we continue this conversation, not just continue this conversation face to face as well. Beyond writing to the press, beyond writing to MP, I think it's everyday conversations with Singaporeans that we talk about these issues in good faith.
Open, honest conversation.
Like, what type of improvement do you foresee in the future other than like interracial marriages? And like, is it like when you show the movie, right? Do you expect like there are more equal number of Malays, Indians, and Chinese together, or what kind of improvement do you actually see?
Okay, that's a very good question. Because what our group has actually considered is that we are not exactly calling for, say, we are not saying that we want MediaCorp to have Channel 8 to have Malay characters or something. It's not just surface level. What we need to realize is that when we have racial stereotypes in media and we are exposed to it, this is called media priming. And over time, we can actually come to associate like toxic stereotypes with certain races or community or groups of people. So what we are advocating for is not to have, not only to have more equal representation, but we want all Singaporeans to realize that things like this are not funny and that we have to move beyond that level of just playing on racial stereotypes for entertainment or thinking that that's representative of our society, because it's not. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, and I think just to add on, I think the very first step is really to broaden society mindset that race relations in Singapore is more than CMIO. There are more than 4 categories. We cannot just, think that there are only 4 distinct boxes in Singapore. Right? Even within Chinese, even within Malay, there are different types of Chinese, there are different dialect groups. Within Malay, there are different types of Malays, right? Whether you're Javanese, Bornese, you're Arabs. So different type of groups, and we should not be too eager to homogenize a heterogeneous group. So I think that's the first step. And the media definitely plays a huge part because they perpetuate this stereotype. And we shouldn't think that just because I have a bad experience with someone of a certain skin color, that everyone with the same skin color will share the same attributes. Yeah, and that we don't think ethnicity or race or the color of your skin should be the core marker of your identity in Singapore.
Okay. Any other questions?
Well, if you don't have any question, I do have a question for you. How did you feel when you were given the wristband at the start of the conference and you were forced to wear them and that dictated your sitting position in this conference?
Let's ask somebody of a minority wristband. Yes, how do you feel? You can share with everyone since we are promoting an open and honest conversation.
It made me think that you all only viewed me as a Malay and not as and not other my achievements.
So, if you don't mind me asking, so you do not agree that your ethnicity is a core marker of who you are as a person, like your identity?
I would like to think that it is about my identity, but it's not the only thing that makes me me.
Yeah. That's a very I'm very happy to hear that. Yes, thank you so much for sharing. Yes, and I think this is a very valid viewpoint, and I think this is something that our policymakers need to be aware of, right? And that's why it goes back to our core message, where we need to write to the press, right? Have open public discussion on these issues and let our legislators know about it.
Okay, I have a question. I'd like to ask, do you think that it is a little premature to be talking about doing away with race altogether before differences in levels of, ethnic group, social mobility, and so on have been addressed? Because it seems as if you are saying that we've arrived at a post-racial kind of state, in our policy and political landscape. But might that not just then exacerbate some of the differences in achievement that have arisen because of these racial
I'm actually very happy that you brought up the point of social mobility, right? I was expecting that question, and I think that's a very, very valid point. But I think that is really at the heart of what we are saying, because if we see news reports about social mobility, how are news reports always framed? It's always framed that, Malays have done better through society, or that diabetes is a Malay problem because of
Or
their
we
diet.
have our first Malay scholar, something like
Yeah,
that.
and I think the issue is not a race issue. Perhaps it's an issue of social economic status because, you are of a lower income, right? So there are other factors at play. We should not pinpoint that to race. And I think the first step is to de-racialize that issue and look at what is actually causing the issue of the lack of social mobility. It could be a lack of opportunities, education level.
Yeah. Basically what I think Bryan is trying to say is that we're not trying to arrive at some sort of utopia endpoint where none of us have a race and the race is not written on our ID cards and things like that. But what we just no longer want to be defined solely by our race. Like, for example, I'm Peranakan, but that will never be reflected on my ID, but I can still tell other people about my culture, my food, and that should be celebrated.
And if you're Peranakan, where do you fit in the CMIO model? Are you Chinese or Malay?
I'm under C, but I hope that, I can tell other people about my people and my culture, and that would be okay, that it's okay to talk about race in Singapore.
Okay. Anybody else have questions? Can we close this?
Well, we understand this is a very heavy topic, and it's not easy that you can really crystallize this issue in such a short time. But we provided in our references links to the documentary we shared, so you can watch this. It's available online as well, the Regardless of Race documentary from Australia News Asia. I think it's a step in a good direction. It's actually hosted by Dr. Janil Pucheri, who is a chairperson of onepeople.sg. It's a board, an organization that promotes racial harmony in Singapore, and he's also a senior minister of state. So I think it's very worth watching. Another one worth watching is also the video by Dr. PJ Tham, show with PJ Tham, an Oxford historian, published on New Narrative YouTube page. If that name doesn't ring any bells, I think it's been in the news recently. Yeah.
Alright then, I think we will close
Sure.
this.
Thank you so much for your time and attention.